Okay? No problem. You can be introduced as anything you like, frankly. It makes no difference to the debate. Let me ask you this. Where were you when you heard about what happened on October the 7th?
I was at home.
What was your reaction when you heard?
I was actually very sickened by it. And this is something I do want to put on the table because I think it's fair for people to know this. In our religion, we do not believe, okay, as a Muslim, I am a Muslim, and I do not believe in the killing of any man, woman, or children, non-combatants. That is not despite the religious teachings. That is because of the religious teachings. So in terms of condemning Hamas and just jumping straight into it, I condemn not only Hamas, but any other entity, okay, wherein it's proven that this has been done, that the killing of combatants has been done. Therein, I condemn any party that does it. Any party that kills people or strikes at people where it's more probable than not that it will hit a civilian target, I condemn them. And that's why I condemn the IDF.
Hello, and welcome to a new video of Christian Table Talk. Today, we're going to respond to a statement made by Mohammed Hijab during a recent debate with Piers Morgan about the Palestinian and Israeli Hamas war. His claim was, as we have heard, that Islam does not allow any non-combatants as a target or collateral damage. That is to say, he claims that Islam only allows soldiers to be attacked and that it is therefore not permissible to take the risk of involving non-combatants in the battle that could injure them. This is why he had problems with Israel trying to kill Hamas, and by doing so, they are taking a high risk that non-combatants will be killed, such as women and children, which, according to him, is not allowed in Islam. Therefore, he also condemns what Hamas is doing. Today, we will show you that what Mohammed Hijab claims about Islam is false, and we will prove that even his own prophet Muhammad was guilty of doing so. Taking the risk in the battle whereby non-combatants will be killed, such as women and children, is allowed in Islam. So why was Mohammed Hijab lying to Piers Morgan? To prove all of this, we are going to discuss the following topics. When are you a child in Islam? Killing women and children during Jihad. The madhab jurist. Women, children, and Muslims as human shields. Women, children, and old men who joined the fight. And modern Western armies. As our regular viewers know, the two most primary sources of the largest movement of Islam, Sunniism, consist of the Quran and the Hadith. Islamic scholars have been using these sources for centuries to interpret Sharia law. Thus, within Sunniism, four major schools of law, madhabs, with the following names eventually come into being: Shafi, Hanafi, Maliki, Hanbali. These schools are named after very early Sharia jurists. This video will quote from highly regarded mainstream jurisprudence, fiqh. You will see that mainstream scholars are also radical in Western eyes. This is contrary to what is normally claimed. In addition to jihad, Islamic criminal law will also show that killing women outside of wartime is permitted if their crime qualifies for this. The same applies to children, focusing on the difference between Islam and the West regarding the age at which a child becomes an adult. We will also deal with disagreements between these scholars here and there. It should be borne in mind that these differences of opinion are not too great. Moreover, a Muslim is not considered un-Islamic if he follows a certain point of view of, for example, the Shafi'i school of law or thought, while this is interpreted differently by other madhabs. It is not that the madhabs reject each other. They are not religious movements, but schools of thought. When are you a child in Islam? The moderate Muslim world is outraged when reports like this appear in the news, in which we can read what ISIS, for example, is guilty of. They regularly execute teenagers as young as 15 years old because of things like homosexuality. Muslims who reject ISIS often refer to the general prohibition on the Islamic killing of women and children. But in order to know whether ISIS places itself outside of Islam, we first need to know who Islam considers to be a child. Typically, the latest age at which a boy reaches adulthood is 15. This is when he hasn't shown any signs of puberty before then. As always, Muhammad's opinion is of great importance. The best way to illustrate what the primary sources say about this is a hadith that talks about killing young people who you might think of as children or teenagers. Let's go to Sunan Abu Dawud, Book 39, Hadith 4390. Narrated Atiyah al-Qurayzi. I was among the captives of Banu Qurayza. They, the companions, examined us, and those who had begun to grow hair, pubes, were killed. And those who had not were not killed. I was among those who had not grown hair. This person belonged to a tribe conquered by Muhammad, all of whose men were killed. Muhammad reportedly had 800 men and boys beheaded here in one day after they were captured. To determine whether you were a man and therefore could be killed, it was checked whether pubic hair was already present. As you probably may know, many young boys have pubic hair from the age of 12. This makes it clear that ISIS is not acting un-Islamic when it tries a 15-year-old boy as a man. Of course, most Muslims will personally think otherwise, but we are discussing the Islamic religious laws and not the undoubtedly much softer hearts of millions of Muslims worldwide. In 2012, a 14-year-old Pakistani girl was arrested after an imam claimed that she had torn pages from the Quran to use for cooking at home. The imam was later exposed as the person who had torn pages from the Quran himself to frame the Christian girl. After her release, however, the threat from the public persisted, forcing the family to flee to Canada in 2013. However, the country had implemented partial Sharia law that would result in her being tried as a minor. However, the full Sharia shows that such a girl could certainly have received a death penalty if she is guilty of such blasphemy. Puberty marks the beginning of adulthood. This varies per person, so the girl could have been subject to adult legislation from the age of 12 before a full Sharia court. However, if a girl does not show any physical signs of puberty, she is still considered an adult from the age of 15. The killing of women and children during Jihad. We come to the prohibition of the killing of women and children during Jihad and the exception to it. We will first show two hadiths that show that it is forbidden unless certain circumstances arise. These hadiths are from the Sahih Muslim collection, a source that is unanimously recognized as reliable within Sunni Islam. The first one we can find in Sahih Muslim, Book 19, Hadith 4320. 8. Chapter, The Prohibition of Killing Women and Children in War. It is narrated by Ibn Umar that a woman was found killed in one of these battles. So the Messenger of Allah forbade the killing of women and children. Many Muslims stop reading here, but the hadith after that makes an important exception. Notice also the title of the chapter that the collector gave to the hadith. 9. Chapter, Permissibility of Killing Women and Children in Night Raids, so long as it is not done deliberately. Sahih Muslim, Book 19, Hadith 4321. It is reported on the authority of Sa'ab bin Jatham that the Prophet of Allah, when asked about the women and children of the polytheist being killed during the night raid, said, "They are from them." See also the same in Sahih Bukhari, Book 52, Hadith 256. Narrated Isab bin Jatham. The Prophet passed by me at a place called Al-Abwa, or Wadan, and was asked whether it was permissible to attack the pagan warriors at night with the probability of exposing their women and children to danger. The Prophet replied, "They, i.e. women and children, are from them, i.e. pagans." I also heard the Prophet saying, "The institution of Hima is invalid except for Allah and His Apostle." Muhammad's response to these deaths could be described as blunt. They are from them, comes across as if he accepts their deaths without difficulty. While modern armies at least maintain the appearance that they regret these deaths, but the war operation simply had to continue. We see no trace of regret or disappointment on Muhammad's part about what happened to these women and children. Muslim Ibn al-Hajjaj placed these two hadiths exactly below each other in his collection. Presumably, there is a deliberate reason for this. In fact, this forces the reader to consider the apparent contradiction that in reality reveals a nuance of the general prohibition. But because they have been put together, a contradiction must be ruled out. Therefore, many scholars have looked at the harmonization of the two traditions from Sahih Muslim. While most Islamic scholars, like us, see no contradiction, opinions have not all been aligned over the centuries. They were not so much concerned with the content as with the applicability. For example, Ibn Hajar would have been of the opinion that the total prohibition came later and the exception was thereby overridden, mansukh. However, most scholars, such as the jurist in this video, are of the opinion that it was not overridden and that both can be harmonized. After all, they are not mutually exclusive when you realize that the ban can remain in force while the unintentional killing of them does not have to be an offense. Muslim Ibn al-Hajjaj also makes his opinion clear through the title he wrote in the second narration. The Madhab Jurist. The later opinion also seems the most logical to us. The acclaimed Hanbali jurist Ibn Qudamah is one of the many scholars who views it similarly. For example, he wrote the following in his famous Al-Mughni. If this means the destruction of women and children, which are forbidden to kill deliberately, and if they cannot be defeated except by that breaking of the riverbeds, then it is permitted, just as the night attacks, which means the same thing, the destruction of women and children, are permitted. It is striking here that jihad seems to take precedence over everything. If the killing of women and children cannot be avoided, fighting will continue in the interest of the armed struggle with weapons that cannot possibly be directed towards only legitimate targets. Al-Shabani, also known as Imam Muhammad, was a student of Abu Hanifa, the name bearer of the Hanafi school. He is also known for the many hadiths narrated by him. Unlike Abu Hanifa and his chief disciple, Abu Yusuf, much fiqh work has been handed down from Al-Shabani. This concerns the oldest evidence for the opinions of the first Hanafis. Not all of these works are considered complete or accurate, but the work we use is known among Hanafi biographers as literature that has an error-free transmission from the original. Partly because of this, it falls under the so-called Zahir al-Riwaya. This is a classification applied to literature of the eponyme of the madhab and its students, who form the structural basis for the law school. Arguments that contradict these works are therefore automatically dismissed. In his Sayyar on international Islamic law, he described in detail the opinions of his teacher. Here's what it says about the killing of women and children. The army may launch its attack on the enemy during the day and night, and it is permissible to burn the enemy's fortress with fire or to flood them with water. I asked, how would it be permissible to flood a city in the war zone, burn it with fire, or attack its people with Mongolness, even if they are slaves, women, old men, and children? He replied, yes, I would approve of doing all of those things. I asked, would the same be true if those people had Muslims as prisoners of war or Muslim merchants among them? He replied, yes. Even if they had Muslims among them, it would be permissible to do all these things. Abu Hanifa indicates here that you can indirectly attack women, children, and the elderly. He does not say that you can kill them on purpose, but you can use large catapults, for example, as Muhammad did in areas like Taif, which, will also kill unbelieving women and children. The same applies when there are Muslims among the enemy. Jurists who suggest more restraint in attacking when there are Muslims among the enemies, or who even forbid this, base themselves in particular on Surah 48, verse 25, which states that Allah did not let the Muslims of that time fight because of the danger that they did not know all believers and would therefore trample also them when fighting against the enemy. However, it is notable that these same scholars are often less cautious when unbelieving women and children are at the same risk. This fact was also noted by researcher Nazreen Badawi, PhD. The name bearer of the Shafi Law School was equally pragmatic. They are not allowed to kill women and children deliberately, and it is permissible for Muslims to launch attacks against them during the night or the day, and if they kill women and children in the process, then there is no blood money required, no retaliatory punishment, nor is there any penance. Immediately after this quote, al-Shafi'i makes it clear that he gets his evidence for this from, among other things, the tradition that we cited earlier from the life of Muhammad in Sahih Muslim and Bukhari, in which he responded to the killed women and children with the statement, "They are from them." Al-Shafi'i then responds to the question why you should not deliberately kill women and children if there is no punishment for it. In his answer, he refers to the other hadith that we quoted, in which intentional killing was prohibited. He then goes on to say that those two hadiths do not contradict each other, even though some people might say so. Al-Shafi'i continues, if he had not forbidden night attacks, then it is clear that death can come upon women and children. On the same page, he refers to Muhammad's surprise attack on the Banu al-Mustalik, after which he killed the fighters and captured the children. Al-Shafi'i further writes, and if the enemy entrenches themselves on a mountain, in a fortress, in a ditch, or behind a fence, or in whatever they may hide, then there is nothing wrong with bombarding them with mangonos, catapults, fire, scorpions, and serpents, and anything they abhor, or breaking the riverbanks to drown them, or burying them in a mudslide, regardless of whether they have children, women, and monks with them, because the habitat is not inviolable, either because of Islam, that the owners are Muslims, or because of a covenant. You read that correct. During jihad, it is completely permissible to know in advance that you are going to indirectly kill women, children, and monks using weapons and tactics that make it impossible to distinguish between them and the defending men. The picture that emerges from the opinions of these mainstream scholars is that killed women and children are considered collateral damage. This is because jihad simply entails a compelling necessity. That is precisely the term of Al-Qaeda used in 2005 when it spoke of the scholars who condone such killings under the guise of Dahrura. As you can see, the words of Hamas, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda cannot simply be dismissed. They do indeed regularly base themselves on a correct reading of mainstream jurisprudence. Ibn Malik, name bearer of the Maliki school, is seen as an exception among these scholars on this point. This is because he was reluctant to use the aforementioned non-discriminatory weapons. However, his successors within the Maliki school will continue to follow the mainstream path. Ibn Rushd is an example of this, given the statements in his Sharia manual, in which he also confirms anonymity among the jurists. And the jurists are unanimous as to the permissibility of using catapults, mangonas, to strike the fortress of the infidels, whether or not their wives and children are there. This is because the Prophet attacked the people of Taif by using a catapult. You can read here that the city of Taif was besieged and attacked by Muhammad, and that he used catapults, among other things, to kill the inhabitants. This is also confirmed by al-Muwardi in his Shafi'i handbook on Islamic administrative law. A Muslim must therefore condemn the war tactics of Muhammad in order to do the same with those of modern armies. The nature of the catapult, as far as our subject is concerned, is similar to that of the rocket in our time. You fire it and have little or no influence on the landing. Certainly not in the 7th century. Therefore, you cannot rule out the possibility that it will land on a child or a woman. However, this does not mean that jihad must be called off. The quote from Maliki jurish Ibn Rushd makes it clear that the risk of dead women and children does not have to stop the Islamic State. Under the next paragraph, you will find a logical explanation for this fact by Abu Hanifi and Ibn Qudayma, which again culminates in a code of conduct that cannot rise above the level of modern, Western and non-Western armies. Women, children, and Muslims as human shields. When the enemies of the Muslims use their women and children as human shields, as Palestinian terrorists sometimes do when they expect attacks from Israel, many prominent madhab jurists agree that this is no reason to end the war. Ibn Qudayma, Hanbali school, writes the following about this. And if during the war they use their women and boys as human shields, then it is permissible to shoot at them and to aim at the fighters, because Allah's Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, bombarded them with Mongols, while the women and boys were with them. This statement by Ibn Qudayma suggests that the difference lies purely in the intention in the mind of the jihadists. Well, it makes no difference in practice. You shoot at the enemy as well as their wives and children and, as it were, aim with your heart at the man. Ibn Qudayma gives the following explanation for this. For if the Muslims had stopped hostilities, it would have led to a stagnation of jihad, because the moment they, the disbelievers, came to know of it, they would have used them, women and boys, as human beings, shields at any time when they were in fear, and thus the jihad would come to an end. Perhaps Muslims will understand better why Israel does not wait indefinitely to attack the terrorists in Palestine. Abu Hanifa confirms this reasoning in the work of Shabani. As I said, jihad is above all else. We deplore all cases in which women and children are seen as collateral damage during a war between two nations. Therefore, wars for the sake of the expansion of a country or empire result in completely useless suffering that is poured out on innocent people. Ibn Qudayma continues about jihad, and it is permissible regardless of whether the battle is answered or not, because the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, did not wait for the battle to be answered before firing the Mongols. It should be clear by now that the most famous scholars of the four major schools of thought of Sunni Islam allow the killing of women and children if it was unintentional. However, the conditions for this are dubious, to say the least. After all, how unintentional is it when you surprise a city with an attack, as Muhammad did to the people of At-Taif, when you know that there will be women and children everywhere the moment you bombard their habitat with large catapults and Mongols? What can be used as a moral excuse? I tried to fire around them, not to hit them? Think about this. Women, children, and old men who join the fight. If women, children, monks, and other non-combatants participate in the battle, they automatically become legitimate targets. From that moment on, they may be shot at directly. However, Ibn Qudayma was a jurist who understood much more about participating in battle than just physical combat. It is also permissible to fire at her if she collects arrows for them, provides for them with water, or incites them to fight, because in doing so, she falls under the rules of warriors. And the same applies to boys, old men, and anyone of whom we are forbidden to kill from the disbelievers. According to this jurist, a woman who encourages her father, husband, or son to protect their tribe from the attack of an Islamic State is a legitimate target who can be shot at directly. Also, Shafi'i also believed that children and women who fight back should be deliberately hit and killed. Ibn Qudamah added that women may also be deliberately shot at if they are among the fighters and curse the Muslims or show themselves naked. And if a woman stands among the branches of the unbelievers or on their fortress, and she curses the Muslims or exposes herself naked before their eyes, then it is permissible to deliberately shoot at her, based on what Sa'id narrated. When Allah's apostle, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, besieged the people of Ta'if, a woman appeared and showed her front naked and said, "Ah, this is beyond you, so shoot." So a Muslim man shot at her and he didn't miss. Modern Western armies. The attentive reader rightly notes that the acceptance of women and children killed in war finds validity in any modern military. We have already referred to this a few times. For example, Israel is fighting Palestinian terrorists who often hide among civilians and knows in advance that there is a chance that women and children will die in bombings aimed at terrorists. However, this is exactly the pragmatism that we find among the Sunni scholars of old. They also describe that women and children may be killed indirectly during an attack. This applies to both normal attacks and cases where they are used as human shields. The Islamic reader will therefore do well to realize that such criticism of the West and Israel does not hold water if Islam is followed. Muhammad accepted that women and children were killed in a jihad expedition, as he could not determine on whom his projectiles would land. In Islam, as well as in modern armies, this is called the unintentional killing of women and children. But how unintentional is it when you drop bombs, or as in the case of Muhammad, heavy weights with the help of a large catapult on people? We Christians do not defend the modern armies mentioned on this point. We also mourn every civilian death caused by American, Israeli, Palestinian, Dutch, or Iraqi, etc. bombings. Our Christian faith does not command us to respect these acts. Mohammed Hijab, however, will have to acknowledge that his prophet and moral example has accepted this dubious collateral damage, and so have the scholars who have tried to follow him and his companions as best they could. And all this is based on general commands in the Quran and the Sunnah, the path of Muhammad. Thanks for watching, and God bless.
Jesus, Jesus. There's power in the name of Jesus. There's strength in the name of Jesus.